On the evening of the 15th of August, 1945, a Japanese admiral opened his war diary and wrote the sentence his navy had tried not to say aloud. America's factories had turned the Pacific into a production schedule, and victory against that schedule was impossible. He was not discovering a secret. He was finally admitting the shape of a truth that had been visible since the first year of the war, when ships that should not have returned to action did, when carriers that should have been rare arrived by the dozen, and when pilots who should have taken years to train were ready in months. The serial numbers were the plot. The diary entry was the ending dot from the start. Japanese strategy gambled on speed, excellence, and a decisive battle. The Imperial Navy prized mastery, elite aircrews, superb torpedoes, exquisite ships, lean manning, precision doctrine. Against a peer with similar limits, that creed might have carried the day. Against a continental arsenal, it was a vow written against arithmetic. American power multiplied because everything multiplied at once. Keels laid in parallel, hulls launched in waves, carriers commissioned with air groups, standing by. Boot camps scaled from companies to cities. Technical schools ran 3 shifts. Women filled shore billets so that men could sail. Even the picket fences of Midwestern towns reappeared as the picket lines of destroyers off Okinawa. The admiral had seen each warning arrive like a page torn from the future. At Coral Sea, radio traffic and logistics ships hinted that 2 carriers came wrapped in a force larger than doctrine allowed. At Midway, damage control performed by whole crews, not specialist teams, dragged a bombed carrier back to life and to flight operations. At Guadalcanal, convoys arrived at a tempo that made distance look like scenery, not a barrier. Each episode contradicted the mirror image Tokyo preferred. An American Navy staffed and trained the way Japan staffed and trained, bound by the same ceilings, slowed by the same culture. The mirror never fought. The Americans did. By 1943, working groups inside naval intelligence had counted enough hulls and heads to redraw the map. The figures said the quiet part. The United States could run multiple task forces at strength in the Pacific while guarding the Atlantic, expand while taking losses, and keep training while fighting. Strategy built for a contained opponent did not contain that reality. The diary's last line simply caught up with the ledger. What did the ledger say? It spoke in quantities that stopped being numbers and started being presence. Aircraft production crested past 90,000 per year by 1944, with fighters and bombers flowing out faster than combat could burn them down. Liberty ships slid into water by the thousands. Auxiliaries and oilers joined them so the fleet did not have to pause to breathe. And submarines commissioned in a quiet chain that by war's end would strangle the shipping lanes feeding an island empire. Essex-class carriers arrived so quickly that counting them became a chore. Light carriers and escort carriers filled the gaps with air groups of their own. In another navy, a carrier was a singular noun. In this one, it became a unit of planning. Manpower scaled to match. The naval service climbed from hundreds of thousands to millions. Great Lakes, Sampson, Farragut, Bainbridge, and San Diego stamped out sailors at industrial tempo. Officer pipelines widened through V-12 and midshipmen's schools on borrowed campuses. The waves took shore work at scale. The Seabees paved the ocean with runways and depots, so that aviation range extended step by step, without waiting on miracles. This was not improvisation. It was design. When a ship left a yard, its crew billets were already on a chalkboard at a training command, with names penciled in. Doctrine adapted because method allowed it to. The Americans institutionalized damage control as everyone's job, not a specialist's oath. They turned anti-air gunnery from noise into geometry, stabilized directors, proximity fuses, and training that punished the eye's lies. They standardized pursuit curves and then handed pilots gyro gun sights that computed lead, while a calm hand just kept the pippa steady. The effect looked like luck to an enemy who had expected drama to decide battles. It was repetition deciding them instead. Logistics turned distance into routine. Underway replenishment became a habit rather than a stunt. Oilers fueled carriers while decks cycled aircraft. Ammunition crossed high lines in swells without halting strikes. Repair ships rebuilt rooms that yesterday had been on fire. Ulithi, a dot on a map, became the busiest naval base on Earth, with floating dry docks lifting hulls, while orders for the next operation were already printed. War at this scale replaced the question, can we get there, with when do we go? The answer was always soon. Campaigns translated the arithmetic into outcomes. In the Marianas, 15 carriers under one banner, with battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and a logistics fleet stacked behind them, erased Japan's remaining carrier air arm in a day the press would nickname with birds. The important number was not kills. It was recovery time. American air groups replaced losses and launched again tomorrow, because the machine behind the horizon did not stop. At Leyte Guelph, Japan tried to create a decisive battle across multiple approaches. The Americans answered with a net. Fast carriers roaming. Escort carriers fighting far above their weight. Old battleships guarding beaches. And oilers stitching all of it together. What looked divided was coordinated. What looked brave found itself trapped by schedules. Okinawa presented the hardest test. Because the attackers no longer cared to survive the pass. Picket destroyers absorbed the first blows. Combat information centers stitched radar plots. Fighter direction pushed cap to the right points. 5-inch rounds with proximity fuses reached out. And 40mm fences cut down leakers. Ships still died. The fleet still bled. But the system held often enough that the operation went on day after day. Loneliness on a picket line is not cured by numbers. It is made survivable by them. The admiral who wrote the final line had watched the earlier gesture that told the same story in miniature. Operation 10 Go sent a super battleship to sea on a one-way run. Her air cover was hope. Her fuel a receipt. Her mission a memorial. Air groups found her because radar and reconnaissance made oceans small. Pilots killed her because training and numbers made mistakes recoverable and hits compounded. The ship was magnificent. The arithmetic was indifferent. By late 1944, Japanese staff officers no longer argued about bravery. They argued about time. Time to train pilots without fuel. Time to build ships without steel. Time to move supplies without a merchant marine. The Pacific had become a calendar, and the American calendar was printed months in advance. You could destroy a task unit and discover that another had arrived while you were writing the report. You could win a night and lose a week at dawn. The diary's final entry put that feeling into a sentence. There is a temptation to turn this into a sermon about destiny. It was not destiny. It was design, and design choices compound. The United States made choices in the late 30s about shipbuilding capacity. In 1940 about training scale. In 1942 about standardization and doctrine. And in 1943 about trusting devices that did math faster than fear. Those choices bled into one another until the fleet looked inevitable. Japan made different choices about prestige. About how fast a human craft can be multiplied, about whether to staff lean and trust genius over redundancy. Those choices worked like art until they were asked to be factories. The lesson that travels is simpler than the numbers and heavier than the slogans. In any contest where losses must be replaced, excellence survives only if it can be multiplied. The Americans built multiplication into every layer: steel, fuel, schools, procedures, billets. The Japanese built excellence into the best crews and the finest tools. And then war did what war does to the best and the finest. Courage did not fail. Capacity did. The admiral's last entry, in that light, is not an excuse. It is an accounting. He and his peers had fought well inside a system that could not deliver the inputs their doctrine required. The intelligence officers who whispered the new totals in 1943. The logisticians who begged for merchant holes. The aviators who asked for fuel hours for students rather than sorties for aces, had all pointed toward the same conclusion. If the enemy refuses to share your limits, you must change your plan or accept your ending. The plan did not change. The ending arrived on schedule. If the story matters beyond its century, it is because we keep mistaking mirrors for maps. We assume the other side will move like us, learn like us, be constrained by what constrains us. Then we meet an opponent who built for a different world, and discover that our virtues become liabilities. The cure is not poetry. It is counting. Count factories, count training slots, count fuel, count hours, count hands. When the count says the thing you want cannot be done the way you want to do it, believe the count.